Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello listeners, this is the first Big Little Small Talk back for 2023. My name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. Big Little Small Talk's a segment where we go and talk to someone in the community who's doing something interesting. And today I am sitting in the most beautiful rainforest in the middle of Toowoomba, right on the golf course, and I am talking to Hugh Krenske. Welcome to Big Little Small Talk, Hugh.
Hello.
I want to start off by talking about your garden here. Can you explain to me the origins of this garden, this house? Perhaps actually we might start with the surname Krenske. You're Hubert Krenske, commonly known as Huey.
Yeah.
Tell me the origins of Krenske.
Well, Krenske's a German name, and my family comes from the Lockyer Valley, that part of the family. But this property here didn't come through the Krenskes. It came through the Noacks. Pastor Noack, my grandfather, he founded Concordia College, and he did that because it was something he felt he needed to do. But this was his home. And so when he purchased this, and we were very fortunate to be able to get it after he passed away. And so at the time, it was just a bare slate. There was nothing here. Oh, there was grass. And so we proceeded to plant trees. That was the very first thing we've done. So you can see the benefit of all of those things. We've always been environmentally minded right from early on. Like even as a teenager, I'd ride a push bike down to Redwood and go walking in Redwood. So it was just one of the things you did. In the 73, we actually got it. We actually became the property owners in 1976. And Kay, being an avid planter and loves trees, her mission in life is to replant all the trees and more that her father took out when he was grazing. He was good at ring barking.
So tell me a little bit more about that. Where did Kay grow up?
Kay grew up at the foothills of the Bunya Mountains in a place called Yamshin, and they had 1,000 acres there. And when Kay's dad tried to buy more land, he couldn't. So he sold and bought 4,000 acres up at Goomba, and he proceeded to do the same thing up there. And I met Kay when she was at Goomba, and in due course we got married in 1970. And since then we rented in a couple of places. We bought a place and then sold it, didn't live in it. And when this came up, we purchased here. And so we've had a lot of history here.
Before we jump back to the current, can we just talk some more about your grandfather, the pastor,
yes,
who's founded Concordia?
Yes.
And where did you live? Were you living in Toowoomba and with your parents? Or?
My mother and I had a sister, and my parents got divorced in the 1940s. And so at that time, a divorced woman wasn't able to have a male child. So I had to either go into a home or orphanage, but very fortunately my grandparents took me on. So I that's why I've lived here for so long.
So you lived here with your grandparents,
yes,
the pastor, right?
Yes.
And what then happened to your mum?
Oh, my mum, she went and worked in Rockhampton with my daughter. She could take my daughter with her, and she did work. She had a brother up there, so she helped him out. And eventually she came back to Toowoomba, and then went to Townsville, and then came back, and she passed away 30 years ago.
Mm. Yeah. Did you stay in touch with your father?
Towards the end, I thought he was dead, but towards the end I got to know him, and I went down and visited him in Canberra, and I got to know him, but not very well.
Mm.
He was a long distance away. He had another family organised at that time.
Mm. And do you know any of the circumstances of your parents getting divorced? Like that would have been a really, really big deal back in the 1940s, I can imagine.
I don't know much about it. I was 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And did you have a good relationship with your grandparents?
Oh,
Were
yes.
you were this young child? What
yes,
sort of age were you then?
I was the oldest grandchild.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was born in 1946, and so I'd have been 3 or 4.
Mm.
So all my whole life has been spent here.
In this house. What a wonderful connection to the house.
Mm.
Yeah. So you and Kay, you met. How did you meet? What were you doing?
I was teaching in Alra, and I tried to organise the Alra Lutheran kids to go to a youth group in Warwick. So that was the whole plan of that. And she just happened to be one of those kids that were going up there. And then I got transferred out west, but we maintained some sort of relationship. And so that's how that eventuated.
Yeah. What about teaching? Why did you go teaching? You wouldn't have done teaching here, would you? Did you go to Brisbane to do teaching?
I went to Brisbane to do teaching, and then I came back and taught at South Boys, which is no longer there, and Alra out west. Eventually I came back to Toowoomba, and having an interest in science, I took on a science advisory role, and that got me travelling again all over the place with teaching teachers how to teach science. That morphed into computer education, and then I just went and helped teachers use computers for a while. With other people, I wasn't on my own. And from there, I went into head office in Brisbane to do work with some computer programs they wanted down there.
That would have been very groundbreaking. I can remember doing Maths 2 in 1981, and this was the very first advent of computers. Is that the sort of era we're talking about?
Well, the computer education program started in 1984, and I was involved in that. We had to go to Brisbane and write the programs that were going to be used by teachers.
And so you're an early adopter, obviously. Technology, you're really...
So. Yes, I built my own computer well before this.
That is an early adopter.
Yeah.
So let's go back to your love of the environment. Where does that stem from?
Oh, I don't know. Just developed, probably because I like going out in the bush. In those days we didn't have a car, so we had a pedally. So we'd pedal down the range or out to Ravensbourne or in places like that.
You rode a push bike from here out to Ravensbourne.
Yes.
How long did that take?
I don't remember anymore. I rode one to Warwick. We tried to ride one to Dalby, but the westerly winds were too much for us there. We had to stop at Bowenville.
And turn around.
Yeah.
And with this property, it was an evolution. You started off thinking, well, I'm going to... tell me about how your grandfather had the lease. He leased the 15th course. We're right on the golf course.
No, he owned it. And then the agreement with council at the time was that he would relinquish this. There may have been money changed hands, I don't know. And they gave him a 99-year lease of the creek block between South Street and Long Street. And the idea was that we could bring the cows up from Water Street, up through here, through the golf links, which I did. I'd lead them up here and we milked them up here. Eventually we built bales down there and we milked them down there in the creek.
Mm. Has the lease finished now? Is that what happened?
That dissolved when he died.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you started off and you thought, well, I'm going to turn this into a bush. What is it called? Is it called a native? It's not a native rainforest.
Well, at the time, the hardest thing to do was what do we plant? And so I did my research and I looked at rainforests. What I didn't look at was dry rainforests. There was very little information. So we had to look at subtropical rainforests, and that's why we started to plant eucalypts, because eucalypts you find them fairly dominant in rainforests. So you've got your big Sydney blue gums in the Ravensbourne, but in a dry rainforest, you don't have any eucalypts. None, not one. So we've got to live with that. Yeah.
So was that a mistake? Was that mistake number one?
That was mistake number one. Mistake number two was going to nurseries trying to buy cedar trees. Took me 3 goes to get something that was a red cedar, and everything else was something else. And anyway, and from then on, it's what we have. Kay is a planter. She's got an in to different people that propagate stuff, so we've got a lot of stuff. In the noughties, sort of in the second part of probably from about 1994, 1995, when I came back from Brisbane. We worked and lived in Brisbane for a while because that's where my work was. So when I came back, I got in contact with Don Sands. I don't know if Don Sands is a former CSIRO scientist who instigated the Richmond Birdwing Conservation Recovery Program, which we got involved in. which meant we grew birdwing vines, which we have a number growing through here. We ran workshops in Toowoomba. We had distributed lots of vines to people. We also propagated the mountain birdwing vines, which is Layana, which is growing there, and it's actually seeding for the first time ever. So, but we had all the proper approvals to go and get the seeds and stuff from the national parks. So it just kept on going. Oh, yes, and in 2000 we had a wedding here. My son wanted to get married and he wanted a wedding at home, so all of that area where the pond was big and open. We used to have a mower.
Is mower a dirty word around here?
Well, we have a mower. We use it down in Redwood to mow the picnic area sometimes. But we had a big open space there, so the marquee went there and the wedding went there, and that went off very well. And we just bought this block here at the time, and so it was just made some sense as to what do we do with it. With the open space there, I wanted a pond because ponds attract wildlife. So I dug this bit of a sliver of a pond, which I thought that'll be good. I could put a little bridge across that, and that'll be good. Kay had other ideas. So it kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We even had to shift a bottle tree because she wanted more space for the pond. And we had probably half the size of this one. We shifted it. We've got the machinery to do it. And it's still growing. And so there was the pond. We purchased a liner from the people that do liners in Toowoomba. They did a good job on it. And then came all the wildlife.
Give the listeners a sense of how big that pond is.
Well, it's about 30 metres long by about 15 metres wide.
It's not a bad pond, is it? No.
It's a pretty big, good pond.
Now that's a pond.
Yes.
And what sort of things are... We went past the pond before, we were having a look. What sort of things are in the pond?
Well, we used to put silver perch in until 2011 when the big flood came through and brought every darn contaminant into the water and all the fish died, unfortunately. So we decided we wouldn't repopulate with silver perch. So now we have shrimp, yabbies, native fish that we've purchased and put in there, and plenty of dragonfly nymphs and whatever else wants to live in it, and ducks.
Where did the ducks come from? You told me a beautiful story before and you showed me a nest up in one of the trees. Yes. About the ducks that you've had just recently hatching. Tell me that story. Well,
the ducks found us. They must have fly over and they said, oh, there's water down there, let's go and have a look. And they did, and now we get ducks pretty well. You can hear them fighting now up there. We get the ducks. Now we have two types of ducks here mainly, and that is the wood ducks and the Pacific black ducks. And it's the Pacific black ducks that just raised a clutch of 10 ducklings, and they built their nest up high in a mess of old bark in the fork of a tree. And so they just float down to the ground or tumble down onto the ground when they're hatched, and then mother gets them together and they spend a day here or so getting their strength up, and then off they go down to the creek and they walk, and she makes them really walk quickly. The wood ducks do the same thing. They nest in a nesting box usually, or in a hollow log, and they also kick the babies out when they hatch, and but sometimes they stay, so they'll stay here. But they know us and they're very familiar with us. We also get a lot of possums, ringtails here, which we occasionally see. They're a bit quieter, and plenty of brush tails. I think if wherever you go, you'll see brush-tailed possums all over the place. The markings on the trees, and they're fairly spoilt too. A lot of the trees we hear are food trees for them, so they've got a lot of food to eat. They don't have to eat our food, but they do like our food. But that's why we have it all netted. Yes.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40dB and they're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're in our Big Little Small Talk segment. And today we're talking to eco-warrior. Can I call you that, Hugh? Hugh Krenske, who has a dry rainforest in the heart of Toowoomba, right on the golf course, and it's just paradise sitting here in the late afternoon. No sun, just beautiful fresh air and lovely cool breeze coming through. Hugh, you were telling me about the plethora of wildlife that you have here. Have you ever been a family that has had dogs and cats? I wouldn't imagine so.
We don't have cats. We did have a dog, one of those things that you get when you're young, and I think all of them buried here. They were Labradors, but we do not have cats. In fact, we have tried to trap the cats. We take them out to the pound, but unfortunately, once the cat's been trapped once and it's released again, they won't go into a trap again. The big problem with cats is the wildlife. We used to have a bandicoot here. Now, little bandicoots, they make a mess in most people's gardens because they dig holes. And one day we had a camera out and there we picked the cat carting our bandicoot off. So
Wow.
I wasn't happy with that at all.
Yeah. So the cat...
I don't think cats roaming the neighbourhood are right. If they've got cats, they should put a cat fence up or keep them inside.
What about birds and butterflies and lizards? You got a lot of those?
Oh, yes. Yes, we have many skinks and some blue tongues, lizards. Plenty of birds. I think there's always a bird moving somewhere here. Parrots, at least 4 or 5 species of parrots visit here. Not all the time. Up there is a nesting box. That's Galar's nest. That's where they nest. Up there is another nesting box. That's where the bees are. They've taken it over. They're honeybees. They're not native.
Did you tell me that you had a bowerbird here as well?
Yes, the bowerbirds are here. The satin bowerbirds. They've got 3 attempted bowers around the yard. And there's a male, I think, any young juvenile that tries to start building bowers, the mature male comes along and knocks them down. Oh. Sometimes they survive, but not always. See the ducks? They're here because we're here. We've got the water here.
I've come to see. Do you find that you get any migratory birds?
Yes. Unfortunately, we get a lot of noisy miners. Now, noisy miners are a native honeyeater, but they're a very aggressive honeyeater, and they're here all the time. Now, some of the migratory birds that we get here would be the grey fantail, the rufous fantail, some of the other smaller songbirds, which we've got, the Lewin's honeyeater. We used to get those years ago until the golf links went on a planting program, and this is going back in the 80s. They had a planting program here where they planted a lot of eucalypts. Now, I've got nothing wrong with the eucalypts. And, of course, what happened the noisy miners followed, and now we've got the noisy miners. We still get those other birds, but they've got to be very, very wary because they'll be threatened, if not killed, by the aggressive noisy miners. And noisy miners are a problem wherever they go.
No.
But you can't do much about it.
So do you just sort of view that quite philosophically, like, well, they're part of the ecosystem and you just have to tolerate them?
Yeah, well, they are part of the ecosystem. They're great at pest control, management. Any insects, they're right onto. So in that respect, they're quite good. The other birds we get that are a little bit aggressive are the pied currawongs. They can be aggressive. In fact, we breed a lot of crested pigeons here. They just breed everywhere. And they seem to be a fairly good source of food for the pied currawongs. We also get blue-faced honeyeaters here at a specific time of the year. They're not here all the time, but they're here periodically at the moment.
What about chickens? Have you had much experience with chickens?
Yeah. We've always had chooks. Pretty well always. Our worst experience here was with a phascogale. A phascogale is a marsupial predatory animal, about, I suppose, with the tail, he'd be up to 25 centimetres long. And we had one here and we couldn't figure out what was killing the chooks, and it ended up being a phascogale.
What sort of thing is it, like a what?
It's a little marsupial mammal. I think it might be a bit related to the quoll, and it's a carnivore. It kills all little mice, insects, frogs, that sort of thing. And that's another thing we've got a lot of, is frogs. And we have So the striped marsh frog is the main frog, but occasionally we'll get a couple of the others, like
Can I lend a hand? Would it be the green frog?
yes, it's a green tree frog. But there's also Perrin's tree frog. We get him, but he's a very quiet frog. You don't hear him as much. They'd probably be our major ones. We don't get cane toads. We've fenced the cane toads off. They can't get in. They'll come across, but they don't get in here.
Right. What are your thoughts on the cane toads? I heard on the news the other day that there was this sort of giant cane toad, biggest one
yeah.
found in, was it in Cairns or somewhere?
Yes, up in North Queensland. They got this huge, something like 2.5 kg cane toad. Well, what are my thoughts on them? I would exterminate them if I come across them, including the ones at Redwood. We do get them occasionally in Redwood.
Well, Hugh, that is a perfect segue into Redwood, because really not why I came here, but what I really want to talk to you about is Friends of Escarpment Park, which you are, I understand, the coordinator of Redwood Park.
Yes.
Can you tell the listeners what Friends of Escarpment Park is, and then we're going to talk about the work that you actually do down there. Is it every day?
We work there 2 mornings a week, occasionally more, depending on what people want to do. Friends of Escarpment Parks currently works in 14 parks, bushland parks in Toowoomba area. All bar one are council parks. Usually it has a moving group. Some people will go from one park to the other. Other people will just focus on their neighbourhood park, such as Duggan Park will have a fixed group of people that work there, while there'll be others there that go to Duggan and Nielsen and maybe out to Leopard Ash and so on. So mainly we're controlling the weeds. In fact, I think FEP does a marvellous job for council because of our weed management that we do for them, because council it would either cost a lot more to get extra resources to do what we do, or it just wouldn't be done and they'd be overrun with weeds. In Redwood, we focus mainly on the dry rainforest, although we've got people that come down, volunteers. Some people want to focus on privet and getting rid of privet and lantana. And other people are quite happy to go into the rainforest and work on the exotic vines and bits and pieces of weeds that come in there. We've got some horrendous weeds down there. Our worst weed would be Madeira vine, which we have growing in Toowoomba. Why, I don't know.
Is it an introduced thing?
It comes from Central America. Central and South America's Madeira vine. Catskill creeper comes from there too. And it's the second most vigorous weed. And another weed I'd like to mention, I wish people would get rid of it in their gardens, it's called asparagus, climbing asparagus, or in some cases asparagus fern. Now, it looks pretty, it grows nice berries that turn red, the birds come along and eat them, and they spread them for miles. So of all the weeds that we have in Redwood, I would think asparagus is always going to be with us. It's our major weed here that we have to get rid of.
Hugh, how do people, the volunteers, know what's a weed and what they should be doing? And they get a little.
We teach them, and we've got a handbook, but we also teach them, show them. We'll introduce them to a specific 2 or 3 weeds, and the focus is on those, so they get to identify them, know what to do, and work on them, and then they'll graduate into other weeds as appropriate.
They get their weed badges and they get to move up.
That's a thing. We've never thought of investigating that one.
So, Hugh, I can imagine it'll be hot, it'll be cold, it'll be rainy, it'll be, strenuous. Do you just love it?
Well, yes. But the great thing about Redwood is it's out of the westerlies, so it can be horrible cold up in Toowoomba, and you get down to the rainforest and it's very mild. The only hassle we have is usually if it's wet weather, then we have to be careful. We can't have people slipping and falling over, and also we've got to watch out for if it's very windy, tree branches coming down. So those things we have to be careful of.
What size workforce are we talking about? Volunteers down in working all for Friends of Escarpment Parks on a weekly basis, would you reckon?
Well, it depends. See, some parks, they only work once a month. We work twice a week, and that's probably why we've got a fair bit done. The best thing I can do is just to show you. I'll just log in here and I'll show you what we do. Work reports, and I'll look at, say, our period for, just say, last month, which was December. And if people have filled in their reports, then we'll get a volunteer stats, and that will give you in December that our volunteers spent 413 hours.
413 hours of volunteers in all Leopard Ash, Bushland Park, Duggan Park, Echo Valley, Hartman Reserves, Highfields Falls, Jubilee Park. What number of people are we talking about doing this huge volunteerism?
Okay, what do they're the hours, number of work sessions, average number of workers there. Well, see, one of those is only one person working. 2.67 hours people. They're the average number of people. 6 at Panorama Crescent, 4.5 at Rogers, Redwood Park, that's 4.78. That's
How do you get a 4.78 person?
Well, if we work 8 sessions down in Redwood and you get X number of people, you divide it into 8 and that's how it comes out.
Who thought of that natty little thing, that little setup? Is that part of your harking back to your science computing days?
I wrote the software, and council have got their own login. So Kim Campbell, who's currently our liaison, she's got her own login, so she can go and check on how things are going. And each coordinator has got their login, so they just then have to go and log in and enter their details. We used to have to fill it in by paper and hand it in, and we'd lose track of what we do. In this way, we can actually have a look at what we do. So, for instance, I can go in there, we can store photos, GPS records, we describe what we've done, what weeds we've tackled. So it's not a bad program, actually, from that point of view.
It's amazing. Have you sort of patented that, Hugh?
No. Anyone can use it if they want to. We just got to set it up for them. And they either can set it up on all their own server, or we'll set it up for them. And they can use our servers. But they have their own logins, they have to enter their own people, their own hours. They're in charge of everything there. FEP stuff is just for Redwood, FEP. So as you saw it there, I was going to show you just the sort of things that we can do.
While you're looking for that, I want to hear about some of the other things that Friends of the Escarpment Park do. So you don't only do the weeding of the bushland and the rehabilitation, you also do cataloguing of native and exotic plants, is that correct?
Well, some people do, I don't. Kay's more into plant ID than I am. That would be more the realm of the Crow's Nest Nursery. They would do a lot of that sort of thing.
What about the propagating of native plants? We've got the helicopter, the base hospital helicopter going on in the background. That's just disturbing our idyllic setting here, but hopefully nothing tragic happens. What about the propagating, Hugh?
Well, Kay does a lot of propagating. She just loves doing that sort of thing. Otherwise, we go to Crow's Nest Nursery, and we sometimes pass them on with seeds, things that are unique to Redwood. Let's get this period here last month.
And what about the walks that you take in Redwood? Do you do daylight and spotlight walks within the park?
We do spotlighting walks in different parks. The last one we did was at Nielsen Park about a month or so ago. We did one at Redwood last September, I think, was the last one we did there. We do take guided walks, like we took the Toowoomba bushwalkers through their Redwood last year. We take Indigenous groups through, and I'd like to think we've got a fairly good relationship with the local Indigenous people, mainly the Bunya People's Aboriginal Corporation. They've actually helped us do some work in there. We've actually employed them using grant money from council.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40dB and we're talking to Hugh Krenske, who is the coordinator of Redwood Parks, Friends of the Escarpment Parks. Hugh, I wanted to talk to you about the significance of Redwood Park. Talk to me about why it's a special park and what sort of things you find in Redwood Park that are unique totally to Redwood Park.
Well, it's not. I don't think there's anything that's unique to Redwood Park, but it's an endangered ecosystem for a start, which means there's not too many other environments like it. It's got a dry rainforest in it, and it's usually a vine thicket. It's classified as an RE type, a regional ecosystem type, and I won't go into those numbers. We have, for instance, we've got black-breasted buttonquail in there. We've had powerful owls in there, and they even bred last year. We've got koalas in there, and unfortunately we lost two last year, and the year before, lost two koalas. And the main problem with that is, of course, the dogs. We've never come across a dog actually mauling one, but we come across the evidence. Dead pythons, nothing wrong with python, koalas, wallabies, and the big monitor lizards. And if the dogs are off, they're just natural hunters. Most of them are, the big ones.
So Hugh, tell me about that, people letting their dogs off when they're walking in Jubilee and Redwood. And I mean, you've obviously outlined the danger there.
Yeah. Well, I put signs up to try and say, hey, you keep your dog on a leash. And generally people who walk on Mondays and Thursdays know we're going to be there. And so they'll always make sure their dog's on a leash while we're in the vicinity. They often pull them off the leash after they're out of sight. We had troubles with the signs initially because if we put them low, people just rip them off. So we had to climb up a tree and put them right up a tree. But we'd like to think that it would go back to the pre-Toowoomba Regional Council days when dogs were not allowed in our bushland parks. And that was back prior to 2008, I think. I've been working in Redwood now since 2005 on a sort of semi-consistent basis and very regularly since 2011.
Hugh, is that sort of work, is it like painting the Sydney Harbour Bridge? You get to one end and then you have to go back and start again?
Well, during the drought, we were doing very, very well. It went so well that we were breaking into new areas. For instance, it was because of that we found the Indigenous artefacts up there, which we won't go into too much. But it was because we were looking for new areas that Kay discovered these things, and we were really puzzled about that because we thought it was a prank, but apparently it wasn't. But since then, we've had a lot of rain. In the last 3 years, I think we've had 4 times. In fact, last year we had 4 times the average rain, and all the weeds grew, all the plants grew. So we were stuck with a massive Madeira vine explosion. Not so much cat's claw, but Madeira, coralberry, all the things that have their seeds would last for a fair while. Green panic, but we're now hopefully, with it a bit dry, we're getting back on top of it. Our Madeira vine is the worst one that we've got to deal with.
Tell me about the people that volunteer there. Tell me about, you don't have to name names, but tell me about the people, why they do it, and to give so willingly of their time.
I think some of them come down because they see what we're doing and want to be part of it. Some come down because historically they were always part of it. I know one fellow used to come down there as a kid, and now he's 80 odd, and so he's now pulling lantana and privet out. Other people, well, one is a former councillor from New South Wales, and he was on the Weeds Council in the Tablelands area of northern New South Wales, and so he helps us out a couple of times a week. Other people just come because that's what they want to do. Want to just pull weeds out of our environment, keep it going.
It's an incredible thing to do.
We do it also because the animals like it. It's not just the plants and the things, it's also the animals that live there. They benefit from it as once we've seen the resurgence of the black-breasted button quail. We were starting to see it again in 2017 after that drought, and they made a resurgence. They weren't seen since the 90s before then, and now they're back, and I picked them up on wildlife cameras just a couple of weeks ago. So we know they're there.
And there's a special type of orchid there as well, isn't there?
Yes, there's Sarcocalis wanthalii, and it's also growing up in the rainforest. We don't talk about where it is.
State secret?
In the 70s. In the 70s there was an explosion of orchid growers, native orchid growers, and a lot of orchids got raped by, they raped the countryside and took the orchids. And so we still have a lot of orchids in Redwood, believe me, all sorts of orchids growing in different places. And but Sarcocalis wanthalii is an orchid that's listed as vulnerable, and so we want to protect where it is. Yeah.
So I read somewhere too, might have been on your website, that your group provide work gloves and good smokos. The work is social, active, enjoyable and rewarding.
Yes, well, as you said, we have a nice food forest here, and any excess goes down there, and we have a sharing process there. Yes, so we work for 2.5 hours, then we have morning tea and we go home after that. There's a lot of discussion goes on at that time.
When you say good smokos, you bring your own smoko and you won't share it, and you're talking leftover tomatoes and leftover corn and...
Well, you could say they're leftovers. I just say they're excess.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
Now, the thing I'm passionate about, Kay's more passionate than I am, is linking the connection between the flora and the fauna. The fauna won't live without the flora, and likewise the flora won't live without the fauna, because they all sort of work in harmony. And lately we've just been getting into something else, and that's that third kingdom called fungi, which is also a very, very important part in a forest. I won't go into that too detail at the moment. One thing I would like to have happen is to get a Gardens for Wildlife program going in Toowoomba. We have a Land for Wildlife program, but that limits people to large landowners or people living in peri-urban areas, because they're the only ones that are going to have a hectare or more. But people who have less than that, I think a Gardens for Wildlife program with good guidance and access to appropriate plants could do a great deal to form natural corridors, whether it's a street corridor or whether it's a neighbourhood corridor, providing habitat and food for our native animals. And it's not hard to do. In fact, there'd probably be a lot of people already doing it. But it'd be nice to recognise the fact and stimulate more interest in that sort of thing. We've got some natural corridors here already, we're very lucky. We live at the back of the golf links, so we pick up a lot of bird life from there. We've got creek corridors, but there's a lot more that could be done other than just grow pretty flowers. As you can see, we're not really great pretty flower people. They've got pretty flowers. There's lots of natives that are pretty flowers. Up the front we had a Oh,
Is it the one that came from out west?
no. I was thinking of the brachychiton discolor up there. And brachychiton discolors are a marvellous plant, and they grow naturally in redwood. That's one of their homes, and they'd make a great street tree. I don't see many bottle trees at all along the streets, and maybe the council's got something against brachychiton discolors, but they're good. They'd be a good colourful street tree. They come into flower about when the after winter. They are deciduous, so they'll drop their leaves. Toowoomba has got lots of things flowering in around October, November. Flame trees, which is a brachychiton. The purple one, jacarandas, and silky oaks. Two of those are natives. The jacaranda's not, but it's the one you see everywhere in around November, exam time.
Well, Hugh, as what happens with me, unfortunately, is I tend to run out of time because I love listening to what work you're doing and where you've come from and where you're going. I was going to ask you about your views on climate change and how you're feeling about the future of the world.
Well, I look at everything positively. I think we can make a change. We've got the capabilities of doing it. We've got to have the will to do it. People have got to say yes. And I think there's a lot more people taking notice and trying to do something. And it can be done just by modifying your own behaviour. It's not a big ask. Not everyone has to have solar power panels on their roofs or solar hot water systems. But there's a lot of things that people can do just by changing the way they live.
So you think there's hope for us yet?
Oh yes, I think there's hope.
There's definitely hope.
Kay may be different.
Kay might have a different point
Yes.
of view. Well, look, I'm running out of time, but I know that you grow a lot of food here. So if I can ask you this question, if you could only carry one type of food in your pocket, what would it be?
It'd be water.
Is water a food?
Well, okay, but without it, we wouldn't. What food do I really like? I can't cart in my pocket. I like lettuce, beans, they're good. I suppose if I was going to cart a fruit that could sustain me, it'd be citrus, oranges. Because, yeah.
Lots of sucrose, keep you,
Yes.
or fructose.
Yes.
All right, Hugh, what about, do you think your priorities have changed since when you were younger?
Oh, yes. Now I see a much greater need for people to be environmentally aware. Really have to be. We've only got one of environment, and biodiversity is the key to it all. And we've got to be biodiverse aware. I had a heap of notes on that.
No notes. All right, Hugh, what about in 3 words, I am?
I am a responsible human being.
A responsible human being. I love it. What about the last thing that made you laugh out loud, Hugh?
You.
Well, I didn't know that I was a person who could make you laugh out loud. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you very much, Hugh. What about what scares you most about your future?
Well, I suppose it's to do with how we look after this simple environment that we've got and maintain it. Look, I've tried to get weekend groups happening with people, younger people, trying to get them involved in work, in volunteering, and it's very difficult. They've got sport. Sport seems to drive everyone in a certain direction, and if it's not in front of TV sets, it's out watching their kids play. I've been there, we did that too. So I think if people can lead a balanced life and start to say, okay, I've got to give something back to this wonderful environment of ours, because if we don't, it's not going to be there. Our children, our grandchildren may not be there to enjoy it. They're my feelings on it.
Yes, it's a scary thought. I have to agree. Hugh, you don't strike me as much of a royal-loving person, but do you, or if I said, who is your favourite royal, doesn't have to be British and they don't have to be living, what would you say?
Oh, well, I did have a lot of time for the Queen, I suppose. And the other one, I suppose, I thought is doing a good job is Princess Mary.
Do you love the fact that she's an Aussie?
Yes.
Now, I don't know whether you'd be a dancing man either, Hugh. You're not. He's shaking his head,
No,
listeners.
I haven't danced for years.
But what would be the song that couldn't keep you off the dance floor?
There's none.
What about a song that you know all the words to, that you love to sing?
Oh, strike.
What was the song that you and Kay, what was your wedding song?
The old traditional one, that whatever that was.
Whatever that one was.
63 years ago.
63 years.
Oh, 62? Yeah, 63 years. Yeah.
That's not a bad effort.
No, 53, sorry.
Oh.
53, I'm not that old.
Sorry, Kay, we gave you another 10 years there. All right, well, we'll let you off on the song. But, Hugh, I read a quote, and it goes like this. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And when I read that, I thought about your work down there at Redwood and the Friends of the Escarpment Park, and I just thought that is so fitting. It really fits the work that you do. You're a small group of dedicated people changing the world.
We're changing Redwood anyway. And we're changing a few people's attitudes that come down. We get quite a few people that come up from the coast because of the bird life in Redwood. And there's quite a prolific lot of bird life there. Yeah, I think it's a fitting statement. I would love it to get a few more people involved.
Well, just with that, how if someone wanted to get involved, how would they get involved?
Well, we've got a website, fep.org.au is our website, and it's just a matter of getting onto there, and there's contact details there. I do have an email address.
But if they look up Friends of the Escarpment Park, they'll find you.
Yes, right. They'll find us.
Volunteers welcome.
Yes, very
All right,
much so.
Hugh, with that, we're going to wrap it up, but thank you so much for being my guest on Big Little Small Talk. Your commitment and dedication to the environment is unquestionable and unparalleled, I think, and it's been a real honour to have you on my segment today. Thank you, Hugh.
I hope that people are able to get more involved in the work we do or in their own backyard. Growing stuff other than the pretty flowers, stuff that supports the local wildlife. And pretty flowers help too. They attract insects. And we're seeing a decimation of insects in the world. I don't know if you drive out in the country. Years ago, you'd have a heck of a job cleaning a windscreen. How often do you do that now?
Hugh, that's a very thoughtful thing for us to finish on. Thank you once again for being my guest. Thank you, Hugh.
Okay, thank you.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.